Thank you so much for joining us. I greatly appreciate it. I'm Congressman Pete Aguilar here in the Inland Empire, and I'm joined by some amazing guests, and we're just going to have a conversation about impacts that COVID is having to Inland Empire schools and families and kids. So I just wanted to thank all of you for tuning in, and obviously thanks to my panelists for joining. We're reminded every day the impacts that COVID-19 is having across our country. 83,000 deaths, 60 million infections, 16 million Americans out of work. I mean, the economic catastrophe is very real, and it affects our students, it affects our families and our communities. And while we've heard that California students are learning remotely now, including in my own household, it's important that we understand how challenging that environment is for Inland Empire students, parents, teachers, and family members. Today, I'm joined by local leaders who are serving our youth and our community in the Inland Empire to discuss the impacts of the pandemic on our kids, in our communities, and the urgent need for robust federal funding to help safely reopen our schools and rebuild our communities. We're joined by Ted Alejandre, who is the San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools, Ashley Bethas Alcala, President of the San Bernardino Teachers Association, and Patricia Nichols Butler, President and Chief Executive Officer of Community Action Partnership here in San Bernardino. Each panelist will take just a couple moments to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right into some questions just to get a clearer sense of how schools are being impacted and our children and our families are being impacted here in the Inland Empire. With that, Ted, go ahead.
Thank you, Congressman. It's great to be here with these incredible panel members. I'm looking forward to the conversation today. I'm Ted Alejandre, County Superintendent for San Bernardino County. Our county has 33 school districts throughout San Bernardino County with about 406,000 students. And all of us are right now engaging in distance learning with students, really to support all their needs. I'm looking forward to having more conversation regarding this important topic.
Thanks, Ted. Ashley?
Good afternoon, Congressman. Thanks for allowing me to be with these honored guests today and just to talk a little bit about how things are going in San Bernardino. And I represent the 3,000 certificated non-management members of the San Bernardino Teachers Association, who since August 3rd have been providing distance learning to our 55,000 scholars in the city of San Bernardino. And just looking forward to this conversation today and your involvement at the national level to help support us.
Thanks so much, Ashley. Pat?
Well, again, thank you to the panelists for allowing me to be a part of this, and thank you, Congressman. It's really an honor. As the Congressman mentioned, I am CEO of a Community Action Partnership of San Bernardino County. Community Action Partnership has been serving our residents, our low-income residents, for the past 55 years with essential services. We've been most involved during this pandemic in serving the needs of those who are food insecure through our food bank and through our housing supportive programs, and a little bit through our utility assistance program. So thank you for the opportunity to share more about what we have to offer to our low-income families during this time.
Thanks so much, Pat. Appreciate it. The first question, we'll just get right into it. This is for Ted and then Ashley. With virtual learning in full swing here in the Inland Empire, what are some of the biggest challenges and frustrations you've heard from teachers and from scholars?
Just for me, I know that when we closed schools back in March, I think many people at the time thought it was going to be a short period of time. I think most schools looked at 2 weeks, and then we extended to 2 months, and then it went to the end of the year. And so the uncertainty of how this virus is impacting our communities has been something that's been very difficult from a planning perspective. We feel now that it still continue to may go on for months and months and even more months. And so not knowing that's difficult from a planning perspective. I think all of our districts were really planning to have some type of hybrid model when kids came back for this school year. And because of the increase in the virus and the need to really ensure safety of staff and students in our communities, the governor issued the order, especially for hotspots like us in San Bernardino County, we had to move to a full distance learning environment. And so teachers really are creative individuals. They know how to do distance learning to the best of their ability and resources. So they've really ramped up their approach to connect with all students. But getting all the devices, all the hotspots, connectivity, we have a lot of computers that districts have tried to get, and they're on order, but because of the supply chain, they haven't been able to get all the devices they need. So they've looked at other creative ways to connect with students. You know, for example, a partnership with KVCR where we have telecasts that's designed for K-12 programming during the day, and content experts from teachers in terms of developing work-based learning plans and industry connected plans that veer off of that programming has been another way to use telecast, and then learning materials and packets of information for students and getting on the phone and talking to students. All of those different ways to connect has been challenging because the teachers don't have all the resources that we need to really be full blown in terms of 100% connectedness. But with what we have, I think our teachers are doing an amazing job out there trying to connect all students.
Thanks, Ted. Ashley, challenges and observations?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, the number one thing that our teachers say is they want to be with their students. I mean, we wouldn't choose distance learning if our options were to be with students. And so, you know, unfortunately right now it's not safe for us to do so. And so as, you know, as Ted said, our teachers are going above and beyond to meet the needs of their students and their families. We are connected to our parents in a way that I think we aren't usually used to when we're in the brick and mortar, you know, day to day at our school sites. We're in our students' homes every day now through distance learning. And so, you know, teachers are wearing many hats, including those of us, you know, who are parents ourselves, teaching our own children, meeting the needs of our students, and then also just seeing some of the disparities with the students in the community that we serve with the food insecurity, the you know, the dependence on our district to provide them with meals every day, and how we're coordinating that with our learning time, you know, and also just making sure that we are that safe haven for many of our students. We have 6,000 homeless students that live in San Bernardino City, and making sure that we're still connecting with those students and getting their learning needs met and other needs that they may have. So it's really important to have those, you know, community-based organizations like Ms. Nichols to help partner with so that we can meet everybody's needs.
Pat, when it comes to meeting the needs, as Ashley mentioned, of Inland Empire families, you know, we know that the work that you and Community Action Partnership, you know, really is such a backbone to that. You know, what are you seeing and what are you hearing from Inland Empire families on what they need in the situation that they're going through?
So of course, most of our families that are coming for our services are still in need of the essential services prior to the pandemic. And that is support with their housing costs, having enough food to supply for their family, being able to pay their bills, their utility bills, those type of essential services. But now that the kids are back in school, just having a learning environment that's conducive for the children. And if you can imagine, if a family of 8 is living in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, that doesn't provide the best learning environment for the children. And so what we're hoping to be able to do is address that with some of our families by identifying if they are having those challenges. We were fortunate, Congressman, because of your support, to be able to get additional funding with the CARES Act. And so what we're looking to do is to partner with the school districts and see how we can support those families in creating a learning environment that's more conducive for the children. We are also hearing that the connectivity, of course, as it was mentioned, some of the hotspots are still not available. Some of the Chromebooks that they need are still on order for the family. So those are all challenges. And then you often too have a family where they're essential workers. And so they're having to come to work while their kids are at home trying to do the learning. And maybe it's a grandparent sitting in for them. And they're not really technology savvy as well. So that can create its own challenges. So the challenges run the full gamut. All that we were seeing in a county that already has such great needs, just exemplified by this pandemic.
Those are great points. No, thanks, Pat. Ted, what do parents, when we talk to, your peers and county superintendents, and you work closely, I know, with all the district superintendents and districts as well. What do parents, want to see? What do administrators want to see in order to reopen safely? And Ashley, then I'm going to come to you with a perspective from teachers and administrators and educators on what they want to see as well, because we know, as you mentioned, they want to be in the classrooms, they want to see their kids, they want to help. But what do we need to see from the health side, Ted, in order to start that process?
Well, they really need to be comfortable that the information, the data that's provided by our public health experts really show that the virus is not something that they should be worried about when their children come into school, because they know that they're going to be with other children that are around so many other individuals in their families and in the community. So they want to make sure that their children don't acquire the virus, especially if they have loved ones at home, family members at home that are elderly, that are in certain conditions where they want to protect their safety. So there's an impact not just for their child, but other people in their families. So safety in the classroom is very important. And then they want to make sure that schools are properly prepared. And I just credit all our administrators and teachers, because, as I mentioned, there were significant planning in place prior to this school year to look at a hybrid model in many cases, where students could come back in. There was plenty of social distancing, there was plenty of PPE, there was plenty of precautions taken, so that if students were to come back, there would have been environments to where they wouldn't be as at risk in catching it, keeping students in certain groups. And that's easier to do, obviously, at some levels than others, for example, elementary schools versus high schools. But I think all of those elements of planning are really important. Number one is the data. And as the data's come into our county, we show that the numbers were increasing significantly. And so with the types of individuals acquiring the virus, everybody understands that the safety is not there now. And until they feel comfortable, the data shows the safety is there. They want to protect, the safety of the students and families and everybody involved in education. There are districts that have considered a waiver. We actually have one in our county, Lucerne Valley, that was able to receive a state waiver under some pretty stringent requirements. They're out in the remote area of the desert, so they don't have a lot of people and members around them that would bring in the virus. And they've taken pretty extensive precautions. If you walk into school, there's those cameras that detect temperature levels of students. There's three entry points. They don't allow people to come onto campus except for teachers and authorized staff. They have circles in the grass where kids sit if they're waiting to go into class. All the classrooms have about 10 kids max. So there's low class sizes where the desks are separated pretty significantly with partitions up and the teachers wearing face shields. But they collaborated with their teachers and others to make sure they felt they could maintain a safe environment for students. And they've been there for about a little over a week now. But still, most other places in our county have transmission rates that far exceed that. I give a lot of credit to Corwin Porter and Dr. Gustafson, our public health officer for our county, and Corwin's our public health director. They've given every one of our superintendents incident rates, transmission rates by district boundary, and to meet the state criteria, you can clearly show the districts that are far below, districts like Lucerne, Silver Valley, Trona, that aren't close to large communities. But when you look at out here, Redland, San Bernardino, Colton, San Bernardino, those numbers are much higher. And obviously you can see the difference in terms of the impact to individual communities. But communication with public health has been important, and we've had regular weekly and every other week calls with superintendents and public health officials to assess the data. And superintendents and school boards have made strong, wise decisions to continue in distance learning until they really feel comfortable it's safe for students to return.
Well, thanks, Ted. We know that data, was a challenge. We know that, 3, 4, 5 weeks ago, San Bernardino County was, as a whole, was not in a great position. And as that data gets better, we're going to need to increase that coordination among your cohorts and the public health experts to get a better read on that. Ashley, educators, what's the comfort level for teachers, and what do you want to see, and what are your hopes for as the fall moves forward?
Well, I think first, as Ted mentioned, we do need to start with the scientific data, and we need to make sure that we're making our decisions based on that data, and closely working with public health to see how the numbers are increasing or decreasing, and whether that gets us to a point where the governor has said that we can actually start to think about bringing people back to sites. I think for our employees, it's really important for our educators to know that their safety is the #1 priority of the district. And, you know, there's a lot of planning that needs to go into that. I mean, when we first started closing schools in March, there wasn't a whole lot of talk about the virus traveling through, you know, air conditioning, HVAC systems. Now we're hearing that, you know, it's traveling through aerosols. So we want to make sure that, you know, our district is taking that seriously. And I do think they are in making those upgrades to filters for the HVAC system, providing air purifiers where needed, installing the plexiglass. I know that we're working with an architecture firm to help plan out each classroom spacing, how much furniture can actually be in there, you know, looking at the CDC guidelines to make sure that we're not, you know, having anything in the rooms that's going to contribute to more spread of the virus when we do come back. But you know, all of those things cost money, right? And so, you know, it's great that we did have the CARES Act to help us, you know, fund the initial efforts around providing all of these safety improvements to our sites. But we know that that's not enough based on the hit that the economy has taken from all of the closures of the businesses and just the California state budget. We really need your assistance in Congress to get the next round of that stimulus funding so that we can continue to support our families, our students, and our employees as we, you know, navigate through the rest of this pandemic. We don't know how long it's going to take for those numbers to increase to a point where we can safely bring our students back. You know, because we have a community that it also doesn't have access to healthcare in a lot of, to the same level as some of the surrounding communities in the county. And that's also concern in trying to navigate, you know, the numbers of the virus decreasing. So I think that we have to just stick to making decisions based on our scientific data that we're getting regularly from county health, and making sure that anything we can control as a district to, you know, to put in place as a safety measure that we do to protect our students and our staff. But we're going to need more money at some point because, you know, it costs for all of those little tiny things that we have to provide. And if we have to continue with the distance learning longer, then, you know, we need those tech companies to help out, like Google and T-Mobile and other partners to come forward and help support our families. You know, we're also starting to see some of those rolling blackouts affect our ability to provide the distance learning too. So it all kind of adds up.
No, without a doubt, and you guys have referenced the CARES Act, and let's talk a little bit about the dollars and cents of this too, because you know, while we know that was a good first step, you know, Congress has passed 4 bipartisan measures, and we look forward to passing another. 100 days ago, we passed the HEROES Act in May. The HEROES Act, from our perspective here, you know, would have put over $900 billion into states and local governments, you know, realizing that a lot of the funding derived that goes into our classroom comes through the states, obviously, to help backfill some of the COVID-related lack of economic activity that Ashley mentioned. But also we know our cities and our counties play critical roles in this too. We don't want to see laid off teachers. We also don't want to see, you know, laid off city employees who are providing essential services. And so that's why, you know, we thought that a level appropriate to 900 billion was where we needed to land. The total package was over $3 trillion within the HEROES Act. And like I said, 100 days ago, that also had $58 billion to K through 12 education to help deliver instruction and to meet the needs, as Ashley mentioned, from HVAC systems to technological issues. We know that that's going to be needed, and that the needs are going to continue to outpace, and the demand is so robust that we want to make sure that we're doing what we can. And from Pat's perspective, you know, food banks also receive nearly $60 billion within the HEROES Act that we passed. Other versions that were offered, a couple $100,000 were included, and we know that in order to meet the needs of our entire community, we're going to have to go down the laundry list. So speaking of that, Pat, I'll let you start. What are some of the needs, and will these levels meet the needs that we have in our community, and what other ideas do you have to offer from a policy perspective, investments that are needed at this moment?
Well, what we most recently have been working on is just making sure the waivers are still in place through the USDA for the meals that the children are not now getting. We're really pushing for those to continue and not let those waivers in. So that's really, we've been talking with our mayors, because I know the U.S. Conference of Mayors was writing a letter to push for that to the secretary. That's critical, that those waivers exist so children can continue to get the meal programs that they're getting. Housing, of course, will always be a top issue in our county. While there's funding coming in through the continuum of care, through HUD, we need more funding for more affordable housing in our county. I believe it was Ashley mentioned the number of homeless students, and of course that translates to homeless families. And the reality is that we just don't have enough affordable housing to move people into. And so any policy that's going to begin to address allowing for more affordable housing is really important. I just want to share with you, we kind of play two roles. And of course, the opportunity for there to be a moratorium on evictions is good, but I believe that has expired here locally. And we play two roles in that. We play the role as, because we operate a transitional housing program, as a landlord, and also we have our residents that reside there. And so most of our residents were unable to pay their rent. And so from the resident perspective, we completely understood. Many had lost their jobs. They were working in retail, fast food, probably minimum wage paying jobs. So we understood that. But as a landlord, it wasn't allowing us to do even our repairs that we needed to do. So we need something that's going to help those landlords who also rely upon that to be able to, they're considered like small business owners in some instances, where they are actually using that as their income as well. So a more comprehensive program, when we begin to look at evictions, when we put a moratorium on it, the due date still comes. And so people still have to reconcile with still having to pay those rents. And so something that will give individuals relief, but also that work with the owners of those properties, because that's really important. It's really a dual relationship that we want landlords to be able to work with us to place people into housing, and we want them to feel like they will still be able to, meet their needs as well. The other policy issue I'd like to see addressed is definitely for our food banks. It has been wonderful to have the additional support that we've received at a state level to get additional food coming in, and then some of the policy decisions with the farmers getting food to the food banks through produce boxes and dairy boxes. That's helped us tremendously, being able to serve more people. We estimated about a 50% increase in need in our food bank. And so a lot of the support that we have received has helped us to be able to meet those demands, but they need to continue on as long as this pandemic exists, because still food insecurity is a critical issue, not only in San Bernardino County, but across the United States. We know that to be a fact. So Congressman, we call on you to see if we can get that HEROES Act passed. It definitely is needed. A lot that was placed in there would be very beneficial to our low-income families. And not only that, the schools, I think the schools are doing a yeoman's job trying to navigate during this pandemic, but it's uncharted waters for everyone. And so I think people are just fearful of what to expect. And I would just say the other ask would be for consistent messaging that we can receive from our federal government regarding, following the science, as was mentioned. But if we can get clear direction, I think all the mentions that were made by Ted and Ashley are correct. But I think the families want the same thing. They want their children safe, and they want their children safe when they return back to school. And so we all want the same thing. It's just how are we able to work collectively to get there? And I think that would be, we'll be able to do that with consistent messaging, and that we're following the science. And so we all know what to expect.
No, absolutely, and I neglected to mention the moratorium that the HEROES Act, would continue as well as hundreds of billions of dollars to homeowner and rental assistance, which I know you've asked for and we've talked about. Those are critical priorities, and we know that just adding payments to the back end of the deal isn't enough. We've got to make sure we keep folks whole. We've got to make sure that landlord renter relationship, landlord tenant relationship is protected, and we don't want to erode that. We want to build on that. But we know that people need help, and so we need to kind of meet them at this moment and help where we can. Ted, what are some of the things that I should be thinking about, when it comes to priorities for education?
No, and there was some really great ones, Pat. Appreciate the information that you shared, because we have to understand we're living in this climate that's not just COVID related, but equity and access is a huge issue in our schools. Since the killing of George Floyd, we've had a number of conversations. We started an equity series, which have been 3 webinars with first with the district attorney's office, the sheriff's department, then with SROs throughout school campuses, law enforcement throughout school campuses, and we most recently had one with dealing with students that have the most challenges, including homeless. We have over 30,000 homeless in the county. Many, as Ashley mentioned, San Diego City, we have 6,500 foster youth. We had some of those students on our webinar, and we had one young man who was a high school senior talk about him taking care of his his brothers and sisters, because he's living with his grandfather who's elderly and doesn't have the support or the information needed to get the kids engaged in the school activities. And he was walking his brothers and sisters to get lunches, to get their nutrition, and all the challenges he was dealing with. And when you look at our population in San Bernardino County, we have over 70% that are economically disadvantaged. And so if you look to a family of means that might have an individual bedroom for a student that has a computer and a hotspot or strong connectivity, they might have an easier opportunity to engage with teachers. But if you have 4, 5, 6 kids living at home, sharing a home, living in different homes, living in apartments in different places where they don't have the resources around them, it's extremely challenging for them to be successful. And without the kinds of supports that are needed for that child, they're going to fall further and further behind. And those are students we want to support the most, because we know they need those reinforcements. So dealing with all those factors is really important. Congressman, the HEROES Act is extremely important. We know in California, the governor, when he put out his May revision, was looking at a 10% reduction for our schools. And Ashley mentioned all of the precautions and safety needs that we have to get ready for kids. That's a lot more money and needs for districts to make that happen. And here they were facing this reduction. And so the governor and the legislature, we appreciate, came in with taking out that 10% reduction. But part of that is to look at borrowing as a solution. And if that funding is approved, then that'll support the state's need in properly ensuring that our school districts get the funding they need. Still probably not enough, especially for all the things we need with this environment, but it sure is a major difference from looking at a 10% reduction.
Ashley, what some of the needs that we have that can make their way into the classroom?
Well, I think even before this pandemic, as we went through the experience of having the tragedy that we did at North Park, and then also with San Bernardino going through the December 3rd tragedy as well, we know that our area already mental health resources are not at the level that we need them to be to serve our community. And so you've now exacerbated that with a pandemic on top of it. And just most districts do not have the number of registered school nurses that we need. For our district, we have 74 school sites. We have 24 nurses. That is not enough registered school nurses to be able to have these safety measures in place when we do eventually come back, by doing the contact tracing and the other health measures that we're going to have to put in place to make sure that we're not adding to the spread of the virus. So, we need that extra funding, through the HEROES Act to help us to hire more nurses, to hire more mental health professionals, psychologists, school counselors. We've been lucky in San Bernardino that we've really protected our school counselors and kept having one at every elementary school, but not all of the districts in the county have been able to do that over time, because as we see when budget cuts hit, You know, we try to keep the cuts away from the classroom, so all of those support professionals are the ones who sometimes take the hit, and those are the people that we're going to need the most right now to help us weather through this. You know, we have employee assistance programs that we offer for free to our employees, but I'm sure they're seeing a huge increase in the number of folks that are accessing them right now. And so any type of, you know, mental health supports that are coming through those funds will be helpful to us, and money so that we can hire more staff to be able to manage just the sheer mental health needs of our students too, when we finally come back into, you know, physical school buildings together.
Those were going to be some of my next topics. So thanks for the lead in, Ashley. Ted, let's talk about some of those support positions. You know, when it comes to school counselors, medically trained personnel, school nurses, you know, what are their needs, and how are we going to ensure that we can, you know, staff up and appropriately resource those areas, because as Ashley said, they're going to play such a supportive role in what we do moving forward.
No, it's a great question. And just looking at the funding system in California, most of you know there's local control, and there's what's called the supplemental and concentration grants, which are additional dollars that support the most neediest students. So districts that have those students that are economically disadvantaged, foster youth, for example, English learners, district get those grants to support their needs. And I'll tell you the difference across our county from a district that does not receive many of those grants, a district like, for example, Etowanda, that don't have students that are in those classifications, versus San Bernardino. There's a significant difference, but what we see when we look at their local control accountability plans is tremendous resources put into social emotional needs of students. So it's not all going into instructional enhancements with technology, with different experiences and resources that can build upon the academics, because they know they have to deal with the foundation of what students need to really get to those higher levels and strive in those academic areas. So a lot of social emotional support from counselors and others. We just had our summer wellness conference, 1,400 educators, counselors, foster workers, also therapists and other social workers that got together in this virtual environment to talk about the needs that students have and how to connect with them. And in this distance learning environment, it's much more challenging because you're not there physically with the individuals you're trying to support. And so the more that we can provide those opportunities and access to students, the more those students can benefit. And I'll just share with you a little story. We had our drive through graduation for the students that we serve in the county this past Friday. And, you know, we serve alternative ed students. And so those are students that are on probation, referred to probation, detained in juvenile hall, or they're mandatorily expelled. But when you have those students come into a smaller environment, you know, the care and the support they get from teachers, and we have counselors, we have probation officers that are trained in these environments. Those kids thrive when they're given that opportunity. They go from an area of challenges, of problems, of consequences, to one of support and care and hope and encouragement. And they like to stay in our programs to graduate. We had 33 graduates our first graduation ceremony 5 years ago. This year we had 185. And so these kids are just proud to be there. But I have to share with you, we had this drive-through going on. We had 185 graduates. We did it in Redlands at Phelps, and it was very well organized. And we saw these cars come, and, you know, parents have their congratulations painted on the window, and they were trying to support their children. But we had one young man, you know, probably 18 years old, Hispanic, driving his truck all by himself. Nobody came. He wanted to get that recognition. So he got off the car, had his cap and gown on, came to the stage. We gave him his diploma. We said, why don't you say something to the teachers? We had all our counselors there. And he just thanked the counselors. He said, thank you so much for what you gave me, because without your help, I wouldn't be here today. And then he exited the stage. But you can just see the difference counselors and support staff make when they're there for students, especially the most needy.
As Ashley mentioned, you know, those are often, when you're balancing budgets and when you're looking at making things, you know, stretch, those are oftentimes those supportive positions are the first ones cut. And, you know, now in this time that we're in, you know, now is the time not only to protect those positions, but to really, you know, invest in those. And so, you know, that's the importance of the funding that we're trying to send to local governments, to school districts, to be helpful. Because, you know, we know, like you said, Ted, you know, when it comes to our students in our region, we know it's that wraparound, you know, coverage and service, you know, from making sure that they're home is safe and comfortable, as Pat mentioned, making sure that they're fed during the school day, to making sure that they have an opportunity to hear that instruction. Those are all important factors. Pat, when it comes to mental health services, and when it comes to the challenging economic times that people have, where do you refer families to who are going through some of those issues and having that anxiety and that concern among themselves?
Well, we have always partnered with the County of San Bernardino Department of Behavioral Health. We also have some nonprofits that provide so services such as Clay Counseling. One of the things we're looking at doing with the CARES Act is actually subcontracting out for services that we don't provide directly because we don't have that level of expertise in-house, is to have emotional support for the families. And so we are looking at partnering with some nonprofits to provide that level of mental health. Typically when we are seeing our clients prior to the pandemic, that didn't come up very often, but you can always gauge because we've still been essential services as an organization during this entire time. So I just had an opportunity to talk with some of my staff, and that's a really good gauge in terms of what they're experiencing. And everybody's just so fearful. And so I think that that is definitely something we're going to want to provide to our families, as well as to those that have already been struggling. A lot of homeless individuals that we serve, I'm sure they could benefit from that. So we are going to use some of the original CARES Act funding to put that into subcontracting out and providing mental health services to our clients. And it's something that, particularly for people of color, we want to make it where they understand that it's accessible and that it doesn't come with a stigma, but that we all need to have that level of emotional support. So we're trying to pull it all together and make sure that it's something where our families really feel comfortable asking for those services, or that we, through our assessment, we'll be able to identify who really needs those services.
Without a doubt, and that takes resources and investment, and so I appreciate that. Ashley, well, this will be for everybody, but we'll start with you, Ashley. One of the other areas I was thinking about was just transportation and logistics challenges that are involved. Obviously, distance learning, you're from home. Well, students being asked to go get their laptop, being asked to go get, books, being offered opportunities to work with the student nutrition or the nutrition services programs. What are some of the transportation concerns, logistical concerns that you think that you've experienced students having? And I'll ask Ted to answer the same.
Well, I mean, we're offering the meals, I think twice weekly right now to our families. And so, we've seen some challenges with them being able to get the meals. I know that we were working with the bus company to provide meals to our special ed students that weren't able to travel to the site to pick them up. And, if we're looking at some sort of, hybrid or blended learning, when we come back, we're going to have a significantly lower number of students that actually can ride on a bus. And so, the logistics of trying to get everybody to school is going to be another challenge when we actually start bringing people back to sites, because we're going to have, could be less than half of the numbers that we currently have on a bus. And so, how do you socially distance on a bus and then make sure that, as Ted said, we want to make sure that we're meeting the, equity for it so that everybody has access to school, even in the distance learning environment. And then as we transition back eventually to being together on site. And, we don't have enough bus drivers and enough buses to be able to accommodate for all of those parameters that we'll have to put in place in order to, make sure that we're following the social distancing requirements and everything. And so, there's another funding source that sometimes, gets cut when we're talking about budgeting. I know that under Governor Brown, some of the transportation funds were moved around to different pots, and then we were able to get them restored. But a district like San Bernardino City, we rely on being able to transport a large number of our students on buses, unlike some other districts do. We pay for that for our families. So, you know, it's definitely a stressor and a big conversation that we're having as we move to the next level of planning to come back together.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Ted?
Yeah, definitely have to echo that transportation. Just going back to where I was with Lucerne, Peter Livingston, the superintendent, and I saw probably about 5 buses come in with students. They had very few students on the bus because to maintain that social distancing really impacts the ridership on the bus. And if we were to come back full blown, the transportation needs throughout our county are pretty significant. And especially when you know that many children, especially in the desert and in the mountains, they ride on the bus for 30, 45, hour and a half. And so you really have to protect them by having social distance, but that adds significantly to the cost. So I think that really looking at supporting the transportation needs of students, we've tried to provide some support throughout our county to the community. I think, as you know, Congressman, once we knew that districts were establishing, you know, grab and go for their nutrition, for the meals for students, we put that all in a GIS application that we have on our website so parents can see what's being done at all the districts, to have more information about where to access meals. And I think utilizing county offices and other ways can be helpful. For one example, when districts were planning for these hybrid models before the state gave the order because of the increase in the virus, districts were looking at how to be ready and incorporate all those plans they had. And one was PPE and the supply and the access for PPE. And so Cal OES was able to purchase a large amount of PPE, what they felt was a 60-day supply for schools. But the challenge was how to get that out and distribute it to all the schools in the state effectively. And so they just called on county superintendents and said, hey, would you be willing to assist us? Could we give your county's allocation directly to you, and then you distribute it to all the districts in your county? And all the county superintendents said, absolutely, whatever it takes to get the supplies to our schools, we'll be happy to do. And we had probably in our county, probably 4 or 5 shipments, large shipments of facial coverings for students, shields for teachers, no-touch thermometers and sanitizer. And we got that out to all of our districts. And so the districts didn't have to pay for that because it came from the state. They didn't have to worry about having that ordered themselves and then try to figure out how to get it distributed to our schools. So utilizing collective impact, how can we work together and collaborate so that with our nonprofits, with our state agencies, with other businesses, how can we work together to deal with this pandemic? Because the stress level right now across our teachers and administrators is sky high in dealing with this environment. So the more we can make it easier for them to work with students, I think the more that we can get back to, you know, in a manner where we can really connect more with students and provide them with the opportunities they need to have.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that, Ted. Pat, obviously your agency has to deal with a lot of, you know, clients and individuals and the logistics, you know, concerns associated with that. So, you know, what are some of the transportation, you know, concerns that you have in making sure that people have access to the resources that they need?
Well, internally, even as an organization, we're trying to ramp up our business model and look at that. We go out and weatherize low-income homes. So transportation is our fleet of our vehicles. It's meaning that we're going to have to acquire more vehicles for the social distance even of our crews. So, I mean, everything that we are doing, it's no longer business as usual. We're trying to figure out how to be efficient, but at the same time, maintain the safety of our employees and also going in individuals' homes. For us, when we do needs assessment of our families, transportation is always right up there at the top. So it is critical that there are resources available for our low-income families. I was reading an article in the LA Times that talked about one student who walked a mile to get his books, and it showed the amount of books that he had to carry, but they were just telling his story about, one, how far he had to walk in order to pick up his school books. And then once he got back home, it was still him having to take care of his siblings. And so our low-income families deal with so many different issues on a daily basis. We want to make sure that we give them access so that they have transportation to get to the needed services, that they are knowledgeable of those services in terms of what's available to them. So I would encourage, yes, that there needs to be definitely funding for adequate transportation, not only getting our kids to the schools, but also just helping families get to nonprofit agencies and public entities that are providing services during this pandemic and thereafter.
Thanks so much, Pat. Well, those were the questions that I had. I really just want to thank each and every one of you, you know, number one, for coming on and sharing your perspectives and your thoughts and the needs that your agencies and our residents have. But number two, for each and every day, you're going to work as essential employees, as essential workers, and serving the needs of the Inland Empire. And so that's what we know is important. That's why we all get up each and every day, is trying to make our community a better place. And you three play such huge roles. And as we were working down the list of priorities for the HEROES Act and the importance of increased funding, I'm just reminded of the work that you do. You folks are the ones that are implementing all of those big ideas, whether it's Washington, D.C. or Sacramento has. You're the ones on the ground who are making that work. And so we need to give you the support that you need in order to deliver that. That's why I've been and will continue to be a big supporter of the HEROES Act and making sure that we pass additional resources to communities that need it, like the Inland Empire, within our schools, within our school districts, in the classrooms, in the communities, food banks, rental assistance, moratoriums on evictions. All of these are just critical public policy priorities. And there's going to be plenty of time, in the years ahead to talk about, who did what when and all of those things. But right now we really need to invest and put the resources in our communities to make sure that there's classrooms and an economy in the Inland Empire to come back to after this health crisis. And so we need to make sure that we're investing appropriately. And so that's what we're going to continue to do. I really appreciate each of you spending some time with us today, and thanks for the role that you play in the community. Pat, Ashley, Ted, thanks so much.